Thank you. Okay, I guess you can hear me now. Good afternoon, Nuremberg, and also hi to some colleagues online. Lovely to be here today. Yes, this is my topic today, and I was thinking that I would start with the thought borrowed one two Danish grief scholars, Skjold and Brinkmann, who argue that grieving confronts us with the question of what it means to be a human and what it means to be a person. And I am actually talking today about grieving of children and how that should be talked more in the context of ecological disaster. And I understand that letting children to grieve the loss of the ecological world can be understood as a sort of ethical momentum of learning to exist, how to be a person, a human being. This is very long quote. You probably don't see it, but I will read it. It's a quote from my research data, a long narrative written by a Lutheran priest who have encountered with children who have found a dead bird in the yard. First comes the conversation. What has happened? One boy asks if he can hit the bird. Why would you want to hit it? We ask. Well, it doesn't feel pain anymore. But we humans tend to respect the dead, I say. Another child, what is respect? That the dead one is gently placed in some kind of shelter and then buried, I say. 3 children say that they were at the funeral. They tell about the coffin, the flowers, the car that took the coffin, the delicacies that they were with them afterwards. I asked, how did you feel at the funeral? It was nice, but Mom cried, the girl answered. The other girl said she hasn't seen Grandma since the coffin thing. Mom told me that Grandma is an angel now. Yes, says the other boy, you can't see angels. Can I take the bird now? Asked one of the boys. What would you do with it? I ask. Well, I guess it will be buried, he replies. Then, together we dig a small hole with an iron shovel. We cover the bird, the other children bring leaves, hay, and one withered flower from the yard. Then, when we look at this bird's grave, one child says that you have to sing to the grave. What would we sing? Friendship is like a wool sock, someone suggests, and that's what we do. This is how natural or normal it is to small children to talk about the death. And this is also illustrating how children perform, they do grieve collectively together. Children face death and losses in their everyday life while they play and explore the world. And I would argue in this paper that in this time of eco-crisis, children would need more and more space to emotionally and existentially sort of explore how to be at a loss. And also what Varutti in her paper argues that we would need to find more ways for visible collective grieving. I'm working in these 2 research projects. One has to do with the children's grief and grieving in institutional early childhood education, and another has also to do with what kind of children's questions about death and life. But there we use a concept of existential resilience, and we're talking about existential resilience of very, very young children. Hickman and Pihkala, they have a concept of ecological grief. With that, they refer to the sort of variety of different emotions that there are when we're talking about emotions related to environmental issues. sort of from happy and like hope towards the more kind of dark side of like grief and sorrow. It's not always, when we talk about ecological grief, death is not always mentioned, dying of humans and non-humans. It is often something related to non-death losses. But I would say that ecological crisis is about death and dying of both humans and non-humans. And what is often lacking there is the children's perspective. So I think we would need more child-centered sort of lens to understand what ecological grief can mean for children. And especially that it can mean different things in cultural contexts. This is sort of like exploratory conceptual paper without empirical research data that I'm actually gathering this autumn, but I won't be able to share it with you. That's with you today. But what I'm sort of like working in my mind, that sort of my question is that do children get supported in facing the loss of human and non-human life in the secularized, individualized society, as the grief studies show that the community and rituals play a significant role in supporting in bereavement? And does education concerning religions and worldviews play a role here? And in our first study, one of the key findings is, at least in Finnish context, is that children in grief often feel that they are left alone. Again, well, first I'm referring to a Finnish philosopher, Veli-Matti Värri, when he's trying to sort of like label our time with this pathological attempt of denying the state of things. He has the concept of cave metaphysics, as it refuses to face the roots of the ecological crisis caused by human beings and rather hides and distances the unpleasant facts with the help of new technological innovations. So that there's that continuous belief that technology and science is there to solve new problems we create. And Danish writers authors of dark pedagogy, they are using the term denial to describe our sort of modern Western mindset, which is considering death and grief as something that's disruption to the normal. Culture of denying uncomfortable facts of human vulnerability and death. And one could even talk about grief phobia. McBrien has a concept of necrocene, which could be translated the era of death or the wave of death, where he doesn't refer to only to the biological process of species extinction, but also extinction of social structures, cultures, languages, and peoples. So this would also relate to the death of cultures and religions. So ecological crises concern our deepest beliefs, values, and worldviews, grounding our being and way of living, which is why multidisciplinary approaches are needed. And we need more and more conferences like this. Necrocene can be both understood as a conceptual tool, but also as a sort of momentum for education concerning worldviews and religion, where we need alternative views for sustaining hope and meaning of life to support children in their existential questions. We actually learn to grieve. Of course, grief studies in psychology and medical science, it largely understands grief as an individual emotion. But understood from cultural psychology and cultural history perspective, grief is something that we learn. It is interactively constructed. It is historically formed. It is very ideologically formed. So it's a normative phenomenon. It is intersubjective, and it is encountered and deeply entangled and situated within social material practices and conditions. Like we could see in the quote in the beginning, how children, how they encounter with each other, and they're wondering, should we do with the dead bird? Is it okay to hit a dead, or should we bury it? But it's very normative. And when we look at the grieving around ecological losses, we can also claim that there is a normative ways how should we express grieving, who is the correct person to grieve, where, when, how. So it is very culturally mediated and controlled. Another important concept, existential resilience. I'm referring again Panu Pihkala, Finnish scholar, who writes that this existential resilience is something that it's a sufficient competence to live with questions of existence during the ecological crisis, to which an individual sense of meaning in life and construction of worldview are also related. So this is something that relates to individual sense of meaning in life and the way one relates to the questions of being and mortality. Existential resilience, or the lack of it, has also been related to feelings of meaninglessness, disconnection from self, the community, and the world. And thus, existential resilience refers to understanding oneself as part of the larger human and ecological community, to interdependency and entanglement of personal, collective, and planetary well-being. Matters of grief, death, and resilience, they're all related closely to worldviews, religiosity, and spirituality, and children's existential questions, as they are part and parcel of the cultural and social reality around ecological circumstances. And then I would come to the last few slides where I try to think how education concerning religious and worldviews could be some kind of source in an existential sense to support children to find meaning in the time of death. So I see that religious education is a place to sort of ponder. It's always been sort of a place to ask these questions. In religious traditions, there are elements that can support children spiritual ideas, how to make sense in the chaotic situation. And also old wisdom traditions, they have sort of capacity and resources how to deal with difficult emotions like guilt, or how to face human vulnerability and despair. In their narratives, in their teaching and practices, they can offer examples and sort of historical perspective of these very wicked issues. To grieve, the spiritual, religious, and communal aspects of our existence should be explored together with children to make sense of the death and loss of the significant others. In grief studies, there's the idea of continuing bonds, the importance of somehow feeling that you are not the only one, that your continuity of people before you and after you, and you're somehow relating to those people that have deceased. So religions and education concerning religions can offer this kind of link to relate with humans and non-humans. And also, when done collectively, questions of being and belonging and identity can be asked. Where do I belong to? How does the loss affect my identity? And so on. So I'm coming to the end. Again, emphasizing the collective dimension of ecological grieving and mourning. This shot is from YLE, Finnish broadcast channel. Just a couple of weeks ago, there's been a big crisis in where a large amount of freshwater pearl mussels have been destroyed by the recklessness of forest industry. Big machines have been drying over the river where those mussels have been living, and this was for a long time. Has been there's been active discussion in Finnish media, and this type of public sort of ceremonies where people walk on the streets and express their grief collectively. They say that something has to be done. We need to express, to perform the grief somehow together to make it visible. And I think this, when something becomes visible, it makes this issue, this eco-crisis, societal legitimate response to our common planetary problem. And Varucci is arguing that these ecological mourning ceremonies, it is a response to an ethical call to mourn all lives, not just human life, but especially non-human. And it is the moral imperative for humans to show our responsibility through public grieving. I guess I have just 1 or 2 minutes left. This is my last slide. There's been a couple of authors writing for transformative education. What could that mean in the context of religious and worldview education? It's something would need to completely change in our ways of viewing the world. So there are a couple of very interesting pedagogical approaches that has been introduced, where empathy, compassion, kindness, mindfulness are considered as important aspects of finding sustainable ways of living. When ecological crisis is seen as a symptom of an inner human crisis, as a crisis not only in the ecological, but also in our social system, it can empower individuals and communities for collective action to nourish climate resilience. And Campbell is arguing for a contemplative existential perspective to education concerning climate change, which could provide opportunities and practices to process grief among other emotions. This is where I am now in my thoughts. I would be more than happy to share more with you, and there's of course space for some critical comments and questions. Thank you. Kiitos.